pathological, with no human soul, no love, no spirit, who ultimately are deadly, and whose continued rule ultimately represents the death of the earth. Yes, death. We are made to think that it is the criminal black male that's the threat to the world. 1,000, 10,000 black muggers and killers and sellers of dope cannot do to this earth what so-called civilized, sane white men will do. For the greatest threat to life on earth itself is the white male. Yes. Who has dedicated his whole treasury, raped and robbed the earth of its wealth, created starvation, want, and deprivation in order to invest in the creation of death machines, of vast armies, and vast chemical and germ warfare systems, so as to destroy people by the millions, and ultimately perhaps to destroy life itself. And yet we have some people who see these peoples as someone to be emulated, as someone to live with, as someone to be just like, who will use them as a measure of sanity, who see their ultimate goal as sleeping with them and marrying them and being a part of their society. You must recognize that if you here hold your own life dear, and the life of your loved ones and life on earth dear, you must bring an end to the rulership of this earth by white males. It's in your own self-preservative interest to do so. You must recognize that European society is pathological. Yes, because Negroes have a difficult time seeing white folk as crazy. Yes, we use them as standards of measure. Yes. We have a difficult time seeing them as the principal criminals on earth, with the longest criminal record of any people. One day we'll talk about our difficulty in seeing this. We'll have time to talk about it tonight. But again, it says something about consciousness, doesn't it? That you can look right at something and not see it, or see it for what it isn't. Yes. You look right at the death and destruction of Indian nations, the death and destruction of African nations, the death and destruction of Australian people, the death and destruction of every people, wherever these people have gone. And yet you see these people as being non-criminal. It's an amazing situation. Isn't it? Yeah. It's an amazing situation. People who degrade us in every possible way. And yet we see them as non-pathological. What a trick on consciousness. But of course, you know, the statement is often made that in order for us to be in the condition we're in, we have to have been robbed of our common sense. Yeah, just common sense. In order for us to be in the condition we're in, we must have lost our capacity to see the obvious. likely many than otherwise enter into prostitution and enter into other kinds of addictive behavior. And we often apply this to ourselves as a people. We talk about our self-alienation. We talk about our self-hatred. We talk about abuse within our group, our self-abuse and self-destructiveness. But you know, we often forget that those who abused us are as pathological as we are. You see? In other words, the abuser is pathological to begin with. For if he were normal, he would not have what? Abused in the first place. And therefore, for people to abuse you, to misuse you, to degrade us, and do the things that we talk about day in and day out, for them to do this means that they themselves are pathological, self-alienated, and ultimately self-destroying. But we forget about that. We think after they do all of these things to us, we still somehow perceive them as being psychologically healthy. You have to be sick to think that way. But it's a strange thing, and there are reasons for it, of course. But a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're in a position to manipulate our consciousness so that their sickness can be seen as health, you see. And our attempts to gain health can be perceived as sickness. We have a people then who have the power to redefine sin when it comes to them, to make it look like goodness, you see, and to make blacks who think when they're being good, they're really sinning. Oh yes. People who make their criminality legitimate and therefore pretend that they're not criminals. So that's what power can do for you, you see. You make the law, then you legitimize your misbehavior. And then you tell people your misbehavior is what?